The lights were already blazing when Bruno Mars stopped singing. It was 9:47 p.m., right in the middle of one of the biggest shows of the night, with nearly 50,000 people packed into the stadium, phones glowing everywhere like a second sky. The band was playing, the dancers were moving, Bruno had the microphone in his hand, and everything was going exactly the way it was supposed to. Then Bruno looked toward the front of the stage. He missed the next beat. The musicians noticed. The dancers noticed. And slowly, the crowd noticed too. Bruno lowered the microphone and just stared. Nobody knew what he was looking at. For a few seconds, there was nothing but the soft hum of the stadium and thousands of confused voices. A camera operator quickly turned toward Bruno, trying to catch whatever had suddenly changed his expression. He wasn't smiling anymore. He wasn't performing anymore. He looked almost frozen. Then he took one slow step toward the edge of the stage. Security immediately moved closer, expecting trouble. Bruno raised one hand, quietly telling them to wait. Somewhere beyond the barricade, a young woman was standing completely still. She wasn't screaming his name. She wasn't holding up a phone. She wasn't trying to get his attention like everyone else. She was simply looking at him. Bruno watched her for another few seconds, then something on her wrist caught the stage light. His eyes dropped to it. Then back to her face. The entire stadium seemed to hold its breath. Bruno slowly brought the microphone back to his mouth, but instead of singing, he asked one question. "Can you hear me?" The girl shook her head. And that was the moment the concert changed forever. Her name was Mia, she was 21 years old, and she had been deaf since birth. She stood near the front of the stage wearing a simple black hoodie, faded blue jeans, and a small silver bracelet her mother had given her when she turned 18. While thousands of people around her were shouting, singing, and filming everything on their phones, Mia experienced the concert in a completely different way. She couldn't hear Bruno's voice. She couldn't hear the drums shaking the stadium. She couldn't hear the crowd screaming his name. She felt the music through the floor instead. Every time the bass hit, the stage trembled slightly beneath her shoes, and she would smile. Music had always been something she could feel rather than hear. Her mother, Elena, had spent years learning sign language just so they could share little things that other families took for granted. When Mia was a child, she would sit beside the television, while Bruno's songs played, and watch his performances over and over again. She didn't understand every sound, but she understood his expressions. She understood the way he moved. She understood the way he looked at people when he sang. There was one old video she watched more than any other. It was Bruno performing in front of a huge audience, laughing between songs, completely lost in the moment. Mia's mother remembered asking her once, "What do you like about him if you can't hear the music?" Mia had smiled and signed 3 simple words. "He feels happy." That answer stayed with Elena for years. Mia had never wanted pity. In fact, she hated when people assumed she couldn't enjoy music simply because she couldn't hear it. She learned to dance by watching other people's movements. She learned songs through vibration. She kept a small notebook beside her bed where she wrote down the names of songs that made her feel something. And at the very top of that notebook, written in slightly crooked handwriting, were the words, "One day, Bruno." It was her private dream. Not to meet him. Not even to take a picture with him. She wanted just one chance to stand on the same stage as the man whose music she had spent years feeling through screens, speakers, floors, and other people's reactions. Her mother thought it was impossible. Mia knew it was probably impossible too. But she kept writing those 2 words anyway. One day, Bruno. And on that night, standing behind the barricade with tears quietly running down her face, she had no idea that the impossible dream she had carried since childhood was already beginning to happen. For Mia, meeting Bruno Mars had never really been about becoming famous or getting a perfect photo. Her dream was much smaller, and somehow much harder. She wanted to feel what it was like to stand beside him while he performed one of the songs she had grown up loving. She wanted to feel the stage shake beneath her feet and know that, for one moment, she wasn't watching from the outside. She was part of it. But there was a problem. Mia had never been able to hear music the way everyone else did, and she knew a huge concert was probably the last place anyone would notice her. Still, she prepared for the possibility. Months before the show, she had made a small card with a handwritten message on it. She carried it everywhere, even though she wasn't sure she would ever get close enough for Bruno to see it. The card simply said, "I may not hear your music, but I feel every beat." She kept it folded inside the pocket of her hoodie. Elena had told her not to expect anything. "Just enjoy the night," she had signed. Mia nodded, but she couldn't stop smiling. For weeks, she had watched videos of Bruno's concerts, studying his movements like someone studying a language. She knew when he usually walked toward the edge of the stage. She knew when the lights changed. She knew when the crowd usually raised their phones. She even practiced one particular dance move in front of her bedroom mirror, laughing every time she got it wrong. Her mother teased her about it, but Mia always gave the same answer. "If it happens, I want to be ready." What Mia didn't know was that her mother had quietly contacted the concert organizers before the show. She had explained Mia's story and asked if there was any chance of getting closer to the stage. There was no promise. No special invitation. Nothing guaranteed. Just a request from a mother who wanted to give her daughter one unforgettable night. Somehow, they were given a place near the front. Mia arrived early, nervous and excited, touching the folded card inside her pocket every few minutes to make sure it was still there. Then the stadium filled. The lights went down. The first beat hit the floor. Mia felt the vibration through her shoes and looked up with the biggest smile Elena had seen all night. For the next hour, everything was perfect. Until Bruno suddenly stopped singing. And when he looked directly toward Mia, she realized something that made her heart race. He had seen the card in her hand. But neither Mia nor her mother could have imagined what he would do next. The next song was supposed to begin immediately. The stage lights shifted from gold to deep blue, the dancers moved into position, and the band prepared for the next beat. But Bruno didn't turn around. He stayed at the edge of the stage, looking at Mia. The crowd began to murmur. Some people were still cheering, thinking it was part of the show. Others had already realized something unusual was happening. Bruno pointed gently toward the small card in Mia's hand. Then he looked at one of the security guards and said, "Can I see that?" The guard carefully walked toward Mia. Elena immediately put her arm around her daughter, worried that something had gone wrong. Mia handed over the card, and seconds later it reached Bruno's hands. He unfolded it slowly beneath the stage lights. His eyes moved across the handwritten sentence. He read it once. Then again. His expression changed. The cameras caught his face, but the giant screens behind him didn't show the card. They only showed Bruno standing completely still, staring down at those few words. The band members looked at each other. The drummer lowered his sticks. The guitarist stepped away from his microphone. Even the dancers stopped moving. 50,000 people had become strangely quiet. Bruno took a breath and looked back toward Mia. Then he touched his chest with one hand. Mia immediately understood the gesture. She smiled through tears. But Bruno wasn't finished. He walked toward the side of the stage and spoke briefly with a crew member. The crew member shook his head, then looked toward the backstage area. Bruno asked again. This time, the crew member nodded and disappeared behind the curtain. Nobody in the audience knew what was happening. Phones were still recording. Thousands of people were whispering. Some thought Bruno was going to invite Mia on stage. Others thought the concert had been interrupted because of a technical problem. Then, after nearly a minute of silence, Bruno turned back toward the crowd. He lifted the microphone, looked at Mia, and said, "Wait right there." Mia laughed nervously. She pointed at herself as if asking, "Me?" Bruno nodded. "You." The crowd erupted. Elena covered her mouth with both hands. Mia stood frozen, staring at the stage. And then Bruno did something nobody expected. He walked down the small set of stairs beside the stage and started coming directly toward her. Bruno stopped halfway down the stairs. For the first time that night, he looked unsure of what to do. The crowd was still roaring, the cameras were following every step, and his band was waiting behind him, but none of that seemed to matter anymore. He looked at Mia, then at Elena, then back at the stage. He could have simply waved, taken a photo, and continued the show. That would have been easy. But he didn't. He stood there for a few seconds, thinking. Then he asked one of the crew members for a pen. When the pen arrived, Bruno turned the card over and wrote something on the back. He walked closer to the barricade and held it out to Mia. She took it with trembling hands. On the back were 4 simple words. "Then let's feel it together." Mia stared at the sentence. She looked up at Bruno, trying to hold back her tears. Bruno pointed toward the stage and then made a small gesture with his hands, asking if she wanted to come up. Mia immediately shook her head. She looked nervous. Elena leaned toward her and signed. "It's okay." Mia looked at Bruno again. He didn't rush her. He simply waited. That small moment changed everything. Bruno wasn't treating her like a problem that needed to be solved. He was giving her time. Finally, Mia nodded. Security opened the barricade, and Elena followed closely behind her daughter. The crowd exploded when Mia stepped onto the stage. Bruno smiled, but he still didn't sing. Instead, he walked beside her and pointed toward the floor. Mia placed one foot down. The bass from the instruments sent a deep vibration through the stage. Her eyes widened. Bruno watched her face carefully. Then he tapped his chest and pointed to the floor. "Feel it." Mia smiled. The band slowly began playing again, but this time there was no rush. Bruno turned toward the drummer and gave him a quiet signal. The beat became slower, heavier, easier to feel through the stage. Mia closed her eyes. She took a breath. Then she started moving. At first, it was just a small step. Then another. Bruno followed her rhythm. The audience began to understand what was happening. This wasn't a normal concert moment anymore. Bruno wasn't performing for Mia. He was performing with her. And as the two of them stood beneath thousands of lights, Mia suddenly reached into her pocket and pulled out the same folded notebook page she had carried all night. She opened it and showed Bruno the words she had written years earlier. "One day, Bruno." Bruno read it. His smile disappeared for a second. He looked down, swallowed hard, and then quietly said, "I think today's that day." Mia broke down crying. And so did the first rows of the audience. For a few seconds, Mia couldn't move. She stood in the middle of the stage with tears running down her cheeks while Bruno stood only a few feet away, giving her the space to breathe. The stadium had gone strangely quiet again. 50,000 people were watching, but nobody seemed interested in shouting anymore. They were waiting. Bruno slowly walked toward Mia and pointed at the floor. Then he placed his hand against his chest and nodded toward the speakers. Mia understood. "Feel the beat." The drummer started with a soft rhythm, one deep pulse at a time. Mia closed her eyes. The first vibration traveled through the stage and into her feet. Then another. Her shoulders moved slightly. Bruno smiled. He stepped beside her and began moving with the same rhythm. No complicated choreography. No big performance. Just two people feeling the same beat in completely different ways. The giant screens showed Mia's face, and the crowd could see her trying not to cry. Elena was standing at the side of the stage, one hand over her mouth. She had dreamed of this moment for her daughter, but seeing it happen was almost too much. Bruno noticed Elena and gave her a small nod, as if to say, "She's okay." Then he turned back to Mia. He pointed toward the microphone. Mia shook her head and laughed through her tears. Bruno laughed too. "No pressure," he said softly. Mia couldn't hear the words, but she understood his expression. Then Bruno did something nobody expected. He took off one of his in-ear monitors and placed it in his palm. He looked at Mia, then at the monitor, and smiled. Of course, she couldn't use it to hear the way he did. But the gesture wasn't really about sound. It was about sharing something that belonged to him. Mia stared at it for a moment before gently touching his hand. The audience erupted. Bruno looked down, visibly emotional, and took a long breath. Then he leaned closer and said, "You belong here." Mia broke down completely. She covered her face, and Bruno gently put an arm around her shoulders. For several seconds neither of them said anything. There was only the music, the lights, and the sound of 50,000 people crying and cheering at the same time. Then Mia slowly lifted her head. She pointed toward Bruno's guitar player, and made a simple hand gesture. Bruno looked confused. Elena immediately realized what Mia was asking. She signed something quickly. Bruno looked back at Mia and smiled. "You want the beat louder?" Mia nodded. Bruno turned toward the band and raised both hands. The next beat hit harder. The entire stage seemed to shake. Mia opened her eyes and started dancing. Bruno joined her. And suddenly, the concert wasn't about a singer performing for a crowd anymore. It was about a young woman who had spent 21 years being told what she couldn't experience, standing on a stage in front of 50,000 people and proving that music didn't always have to be heard to be felt. The crowd thought the moment couldn't get any more emotional, but Bruno wasn't ready to let Mia leave the stage. He looked toward the band, then back at her, and pointed toward the center of the stage. Mia hesitated. Bruno smiled and held out his hand. She took it. Slowly, they walked to the middle while thousands of phone lights rose above the crowd. The band began playing a softer version of one of Bruno's most recognizable songs, but Bruno didn't start singing right away. Instead, he turned toward Mia and asked, "Ready?" She couldn't hear him, but she understood the question from his eyes. She nodded. Bruno lifted the microphone and began singing. Mia watched his face closely, following every movement of his lips, every gesture, every beat that traveled through the floor. Then something beautiful happened. Mia started singing along silently. She knew the words from years of watching performances and reading lyrics. Bruno noticed. For a second, he stopped singing and simply watched her. Then he smiled and pointed the microphone toward her. Mia immediately shook her head, laughing nervously. Bruno tried again. She shook her head even harder. The crowd laughed with her. Bruno finally stepped closer and held the microphone between them. Mia took a breath and quietly mouthed the next line. Bruno sang it at the same time. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't supposed to be. It was just two people sharing a song in two completely different ways. When the line ended, the entire stadium exploded. Mia covered her face again. Bruno wrapped his arms around her in a long, genuine hug. This time, he didn't say anything. He just held her. Elena was crying openly now. Members of the band looked away for a moment, wiping their eyes. Even the security guards who had spent the night keeping thousands of people behind barriers were smiling. Then Bruno pulled away and reached into his jacket pocket. He took out a small black guitar pick and placed it in Mia's hand. She looked at it, confused. Bruno pointed to the pick, then pointed to her. "For your collection," he said. Mia smiled and carefully closed her fingers around it. But Bruno wasn't finished. He walked toward the edge of the stage and asked the audience to turn on their phone lights. One by one, the stadium became a sea of tiny lights. Bruno looked at Mia and then pointed toward the crowd. Mia turned around. Her eyes widened. 50,000 people were holding their lights up for her. She stood completely still. Then Bruno gently raised her hand. The crowd began chanting her name. "Mia! Mia! Mia!" She couldn't hear them, but she could see them. She could feel the vibrations beneath her feet. And for the first time that night, she wasn't trying to imagine what the crowd sounded like. She was simply standing inside the moment. Bruno looked at her and whispered, "Remember this." Mia nodded through her tears. But just as the band prepared to continue the concert, Bruno noticed something in Elena's hands that made him stop once again. It was a photograph. And the moment he saw it, his expression completely changed. Bruno stared at the photograph in Elena's hands, and for the first time that night, the smile disappeared from his face. He stepped closer and carefully took it from her. It was an old picture, slightly faded around the edges. A little girl was sitting on the floor of a living room, wearing oversized headphones and watching a Bruno Mars performance on television. The girl was Mia. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old. Bruno looked at the photograph again, then at Mia, as if trying to connect the child in the picture with the young woman standing beside him. Elena quickly signed something to Mia, and Mia nodded. Bruno asked, "How long?" Elena pointed toward the photograph, then held up 8 fingers. 8 years old? Bruno looked down. Elena explained through an interpreter that the photograph had been taken after Mia had discovered one of Bruno's performances online. She didn't understand the music, but she became fascinated by the way people moved when he sang. She would watch the same performance almost every night. But there was something Elena hadn't told Bruno yet. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small envelope. Inside was a folded piece of paper covered with a child's handwriting. Bruno unfolded it carefully. The writing was uneven, with several words crossed out and rewritten. It was a letter Mia had written when she was 8. The first sentence made Bruno stop breathing for a second. "Dear Bruno, I don't know what your songs sound like, but they make me happy." Bruno read the sentence twice. Then he looked toward Mia. She had no idea what was written inside. Elena told him Mia had never sent the letter because she believed Bruno would never see it. For 13 years she had kept it. Bruno's eyes became glassy. He looked down at the paper and shook his head slowly. Then he asked Elena one question. "Why didn't you send it?" Elena smiled sadly and answered, "She was afraid nobody would understand." Bruno closed his eyes for a moment. The stadium was still waiting. Nobody knew what was happening, but they could see the emotion on his face. Then Bruno walked back toward Mia and held the letter against his chest. Mia looked confused. He pointed at the letter, then at her. She finally understood that it was something she had written long ago. Her eyes widened. Elena signed, "He has your letter." Mia immediately began crying. Bruno stepped closer and placed the letter carefully in her hands. Then he pointed toward the giant screen behind them. The production team understood what he wanted. The old photograph appeared on the screen. 50,000 people saw 8-year-old Mia sitting in front of a television, dreaming about a singer she could never hear. The stadium erupted. But Bruno didn't look at the screen. He looked only at Mia. Then he said something so quietly that the microphones almost missed it. "You waited 13 years. He paused. "I think I was the one who was late." Mia shook her head, crying harder. Bruno smiled through his own tears. "No," he said. "Tonight, we found each other." And suddenly, the meaning of the entire night changed. This wasn't simply a deaf fan meeting her favorite singer. It was a 13-year-old dream finally reaching the person it had been written for. But there was still one more thing Bruno had planned, and nobody in that stadium knew about it. Bruno looked toward the side of the stage, and one of the crew members immediately walked over carrying a small black case. Mia watched with a confused smile as Bruno opened it. Inside was a pair of custom-made vibration headphones designed to let someone experience music through touch rather than traditional sound. Bruno had arranged them earlier that afternoon after learning more about Mia's story, but he hadn't known if they would work for her. He handed them to her without saying anything. Mia looked at Elena, then back at Bruno. She carefully put them on. The band started playing a soft beat. Mia closed her eyes. At first, nothing happened. She opened them again and looked worried. Bruno watched her carefully. Then the bass came in. Mia suddenly froze. Her eyes widened. She placed both hands against the headphones and took a shaky breath. A smile slowly appeared across her face. She pointed toward her chest. Bruno nodded. She could feel it. Not hear it in the same way as everyone else, but feel the rhythm through the device. Mia started laughing. Then she started crying. Then she laughed again because she couldn't decide what emotion to choose. Bruno laughed with her. The audience completely lost it. For nearly a minute, the band played while Mia moved around the stage, testing every beat. Bruno stayed beside her, watching like a proud friend rather than a performer. Then Mia suddenly grabbed Elena's hand and pulled her onto the stage. Elena tried to refuse, but Mia wouldn't let go. Bruno smiled and stepped aside. Mother and daughter stood together beneath the lights while the music continued. Elena closed her eyes as Mia placed the headphones over her ears for a moment. They looked at each other and cried. Bruno turned away briefly, wiping his face before the cameras could catch him. But the cameras caught it anyway. Later that night, a short clip of the moment spread across social media, and people who had never heard Mia's name were suddenly talking about her story. But Bruno didn't want the moment to become just another viral concert clip. Before Mia left the stage, he leaned toward her and asked through the interpreter, "What do you want to do now?" Mia thought for a few seconds. Then she signed something. The interpreter smiled. "She says she wants to help other deaf kids experience music." Bruno's expression changed. He looked genuinely surprised. After everything that had happened, Mia wasn't asking for fame, money, or another meeting. She was thinking about other children. Bruno nodded slowly. "Then let's do that." It was a simple promise, but it became something bigger over the months that followed. Bruno's team began exploring ways to make selected concerts more accessible through vibration technology, visual rhythm cues, and sign language support. Mia was later invited to speak with organizers about her experience. Her story became part of a larger conversation about making live music more inclusive. And every time Bruno performed after that night, he remembered the girl who had once written, "I may not hear your music, but I feel every beat." But the most surprising change wasn't what happened to Bruno's concerts. It was what happened to Mia herself. She stopped writing, "One day, Bruno," in her notebook. She replaced it with 3 new words. "One day, everyone." And that became the dream she carried forward. Months later, the lights came up again, and somewhere in another stadium, Bruno Mars stood behind the curtain waiting for the next show to begin. The crowd outside was loud, thousands of voices blending together, but for a brief moment Bruno wasn't thinking about the concert. He was thinking about Mia. He remembered the way she had looked at the stage that night, the way she felt the beat through her feet, and the way her face changed when she realized that someone had finally understood what music meant to her. He kept the little handwritten card she had given him. It wasn't framed. It wasn't displayed in some fancy room. He kept it folded inside a small notebook that traveled with him. Every once in a while, before a show, he would open it and read the sentence again. "I may not hear your music, but I feel every beat." It reminded him that sometimes the most powerful part of a song wasn't the sound. It was what the song made someone feel. Mia's life changed too. She started working with local organizations that help deaf children experience music through vibration, movement, and visual performance. She still loved Bruno's music, but now she talked about something bigger. She wanted children who had spent their lives being told what they couldn't experience to discover their own way of feeling it. Elena kept the old photograph of 8-year-old Mia, but she placed a new picture beside it. In the new photo, Mia was standing on a stage beside Bruno, smiling through tears with the same eyes she had in the childhood picture. 2 photographs. 13 years apart. One little girl dreaming in front of a television. One young woman finally standing inside the dream. And perhaps that was the real story? Bruno didn't save Mia that night. He didn't give her a new life. She had already built one. What he gave her was something much simpler. He stopped. He noticed. He listened, even when she couldn't hear him. And sometimes, that's all a person needs to know they matter. Years from now, people might forget the setlist from that concert. They might forget the exact song Bruno was supposed to sing when he stopped. They might even forget how many lights filled the stadium that night. But Mia probably won't forget the feeling beneath her feet when 50,000 people stood together for her. And Bruno probably won't forget the moment he realized that music could reach someone without ever being heard. Because in the end, the most unforgettable concerts aren't always the ones with the loudest applause. Sometimes they're the ones where everything becomes quiet enough for one person to finally be seen. And on that night, beneath thousands of lights, Bruno Mars didn't just sing a song. He helped a young woman feel that she belonged inside it. Maybe that's what music has always been meant to do. And maybe that's why the stadium never really forgot that night. Long after the lights went out, long after the final applause disappeared into the streets outside, one image remained in people's minds: Mia standing beside Bruno Mars, tears on her face, feeling the beat beneath her feet, while nearly 50,000 people watched in silence. She couldn't hear the crowd. She couldn't hear Bruno's voice. But she felt something that night that words could never fully explain. She felt seen. And Bruno walked away with a reminder of his own: sometimes the person listening closest to your music isn't the person who can hear it. Sometimes it's the person who feels it. But here's the question nobody expected after that emotional night. What if Mia's dream wasn't actually the end of the story? What if standing beside Bruno wasn't the biggest thing that happened to her? Because months later, when Bruno received a message from Mia, he opened it expecting a simple thank you. Instead, he read one sentence that made him stop everything. "Bruno, I think I know how we can help thousands of other kids feel what I felt." And that was when the dream of one little girl quietly became something much bigger than a concert, bigger than a song, and bigger than the two people who met beneath those stage lights. Sometimes a miracle isn't about changing someone's life in one night. Sometimes it's about giving someone enough hope to change the lives of others. And Mia's story was only beginning.